Hi, welcome back. Alex, how you doing?
I'm doing really well, Al. Thanks for asking. How are you?
I'm doing very well as well. I had a great conversation with Stephen. Now I get the pleasure of talking with you about employee experience, digital transformation, and anything else you wanted to discuss, because I know the topic has been hot for a while now, and you there at LeapGen have certainly taken a lead in driving the narrative. So if you would introduce yourself and a little bit about LeapGen.
Yeah, I'd love to. And thank you, first of all, just for having me on and giving us this opportunity. I'll share a little bit about myself and my journey and how I ended up here. I actually started my career in analytics as well. I started out doing PeopleSoft reporting at Time Inc. Realized really early on that I loved everything about analytics, but I was very frustrated without the data that I wanted to do analysis on. So Stephen actually said it really well. Even today, he wants folks to focus on capturing more data. And so I just naturally moved over into an HR technology space, started trying to change processes, trying to put systems in place to capture more data. I realized through doing that just putting in place technology isn't going to get anyone to use the system. Just because we rolled something out or made this great investment in something like Workday didn't mean that anyone in an organization was going to use it. So started to move into this experience space and understand that if I wanted someone to be using a system and essentially giving me their data, I had to create a great workforce experience that created adoption and maybe even addiction if I was going to get them in and actually have the data that I wanted for analysis. So I've made a shift over time. I used to do this type of work at Morgan Stanley internally before coming over to LeapGen. And I like to kind of simply describe what we do as LeapGen. We focus on all things digital. And for me, that means two different areas. So how do we help teams work more efficiently and more effectively internally inside of our HR teams and other enterprise teams? But then how do we do it so that it creates a great digital, scalable workforce experience for our employees, our manage our contractors and anyone who's interacting with our services. So we design that, we work with organizations around the right strategy to get there, what's the right mindset, approach to people, processes, and the right technology infrastructure to be able to do that.
Well, I just celebrate so much what you're saying, particularly around crafting experiences that people want to engage with, because you're absolutely right. If you heard me say earlier, many of these systems are transactional in nature. They're required to establish or improve a certain process. They're not there sometimes for the employee, him or herself. They're sometimes not there to generate insight downstream. So to consciously create the experience and in turn have an understanding of how the analysis is going to happen downstream sounds like that's squarely where you live. Is that right?
Yeah, and I mean, I like to think about it as data underlies everything that we do because without the
Mm-hmm.
data, and we'll talk a little bit about the different areas that data is used, but without data, we're not able to really do anything scalable or digital. And what I mean
Mm-hmm.
by that is the data is critical for personalization. In a consumer world, if you think about what Amazon recommends to you, Amazon loves me and they love to tell me all the things that I need to buy, but all of their personalized recommendations, it's based on the data they have on me. If not, they'd be
Mm-hmm.
recommending things I wasn't interested in. But I will tell you, they know that I am buying a new house and they know that I need to furnish it. And that's what they're giving me and delivering to me on a regular basis. And the foundation for that has to be good data, or else you're likely to get recommendations for a pair of high heels.
Now that explains a lot. the reality, the reality is this: if these experiences, and taking off the Amazon example, aren't consciously created and the data consciously architected, we're not going to end up with the appropriate recommendations. We're not going to have an engaging experience and all that. So if I'm a senior executive, I am pretty much saying, I want that. And then somebody has to go and figure out, well, how the heck do we create a recommendation engine for employees? And so correct me if I'm wrong, that is effectively what you partner with your clients to do, is create these experiences. And if that's correct, what are some of the steps involved?
Yeah, well, I will say not every organization is there yet. And I do want to be
Mhm.
transparent about that. When we talk to organizations, we ask them these questions. So we say, what year does it feel like inside of your organization compared to what it feels like employees outside? And most organizations will say something along the lines of, it feels like 1999, it feels like 2008. We don't have mobile, we don't have strong search. You can't find that for yourself. But when we do work with
Mhm.
organizations, we also have to ask, where do you want to be? And it's not realistic to say we want to be in 2020 for every company. That's not going to be feasible for many in the right amount of time. And so we instead talk about what's most important to your value proposition as an organization. Some organizations are
Mhm.
different. For many, for organizations that are dispersed globally, it might just be having access to information about some of the most critical moments, like taking a leave of absence or joining the organization. Those moments might be what we need to focus on. For others, for some in technology industries, for certain healthcare industries, it might be much more hands-on, and they might need a more manicured experience around something like becoming a people leader for the first time. And so, what we ask organizations to do when we start working with them is, instead of saying, oh, we've heard about moments that matter, we've heard about experiences, we know we need to go create them, we say, well, why? And what are the moments that really matter to your workforce? What is the value proposition that we're trying to drive here? And how does it actually help your business strategy? Otherwise, we're not going to get leaders involved and backing some of the work that we want to do. So, from a strategy perspective, that's where we start. I think from your question about more of a technical perspective of how do we answer some of these questions, we leverage design thinking for all of our work. We leverage it more as a problem solving tactic than creating the deliverables of personas and journeys. But we really focus on listening to the workforce, on understanding what their needs are, and then helping design solutions that aren't just what HR people thought was going to work, but are really what our workforce needs.
Yeah, love it. And the challenge, when you're talking like this, I envision a group in a room with whiteboards and sticky notes and going through a design thinking process. Uh, Obviously, we're challenged right now given the realities of the world. So, again, if there are organizations that you're working with or want to be working with, how would you engage and go through that iterative process to get an experience, particularly given that the experience is rooted in remote work for most organizations right
Yeah, that's a really great question, and I feel like I almost wrote it and gave it to you, so that's not fair. But it's
now?
we so LeapGen essentially is a digital transformation company. That's what we do, and when people ask that question, I say, well, how would we expect you to create digital experiences for 200,000 employees if we couldn't design it in a digital setting? And
Hmm.
so I always pose that challenge to our clients as well as to our internal consultants of, do we really need to do this face to face? And frankly, we've been asking that question since our inception almost 4 years ago, because we
Hmm.
don't want to be held back by, can I get there on a plane? Can I get your global team who, I'm working with someone in Hong Kong, someone in Amsterdam, and someone in LA. We're not going to get you together. So frankly, we've been doing this digitally since we've been working as LeapGen, and we use a couple of really critical tools to do so. So for collaboration, we rely heavily on a couple different things. We do a lot of interactive surveying, like pulse surveying in workshops on Qualtrics, so that we capture feedback.
Hmm.
We use Mural a lot. We have an online experience platform for our clients that we call Leap Central that we use to manage any form of engagement, small or large multi-year programs. And so we've been doing this. Zoom is incredibly natural to us as well. And this just we kind of just fell into this when COVID hit. It wasn't really a change in how we worked.
Well, good for you all, because obviously it's challenging for many companies to collaborate and innovate during these times. So, just by example of going through an experience with you, I imagine there's going to be significant learning for your clients. With that in mind, let's focusing on the remote work. Experience in an office place and using the resources there are different than the experience at home for many people, and they have kids running around in the background. They might have slow internet. To what extent are you involved in looking at that? Or is that something that is not the priority for you right now, yet you'll get to it at some point in the near future? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. And it's funny because you asked Stephen a question similar to that about, what impact
Yeah.
do you think working from home has on equity, on creating more equality in our workforces? And um, I think that it's been harder for many of us, for those of us that weren't used to it, at least, because we didn't live in
Mhm.
a home that was designed for a good working experience. Obviously, with children at home, I think it's taking a disparate toll on women, especially in the workforce. But what I would say to you, and I would say this is how Leapgen engages with that type of question. So, back to data to drive great experiences, we talked about data as an input for workforce experience, but data as an output of workforce experience is, I think, one of the most valuable pieces of data that we have for analysis, and something that's often overlooked when we think about people data. We think about attrition and organizational network analysis, and we think about retention risk scores, but we don't often think about their experience data that we're getting. And that's things like, how often did I start a process and I abandoned it because I couldn't figure it out? How often did I search for
Mhm.
something and I couldn't find my answer because the search results didn't meet what I needed? How often am I calling and asking for help? Am I logging the same ticket multiple times because I can't figure that out? And I think that when we think about that data for continuous improvement, the way that we engage with that is we require that you listen to your workforce. And the things that we're hearing now from our workforce are completely different than the things we were hearing 6 months ago, because we're working from home, because we're in a different environment. And we've had to shift the programs that we design with clients, whether it's how do we deliver learning around leadership and how do we create growth paths in organizations, to how do we do performance management differently. First of all, we should get rid of most of what we're doing, but in the meantime, we're shifting how we think about performance management. And all of that is because we're listening to our workforce, and we have the tools, even more capabilities to do that now that everyone is interacting digitally. So we have even more data to analyze for continuous improvement there.
Yeah, that's exactly where I wanted to go, because with the elevated use of collaboration tools, there is more data, there's more data exhaust. There's also the
Mhm.
challenge of the ethical use of such data. And that, is a decision that the organization would hopefully be making consciously with some governance board. So, my question to you is, when you're with an organization, and particularly those who are using you and using employee experience management effectively, what does the internal decision making body steering committee look like? Are they from multiple disciplines? Is it IT? Is it operations? Is it HR? I mean, is there any kind of salient truths that you can share to help guide our listeners?
Yeah, I will say there is not one answer today, but I believe that we're shifting in the right way. So I will talk about it
Mhm.
in terms of what's feasible and then where I think it's going. So, what we're
Good.
seeing for the strongest design of experience is when teams come together. And I mean that in every literal sense of the word team. So, first of all, if one organization, one department is thinking about experience, it's going to feel bifurcated across departments. But even broader than that, if you just have one team inside of HR thinking about experience, it's going to feel siloed to the employee. So an employee doesn't differentiate between their benefits payments being deducted from payroll and the actual payroll team. They don't understand that those are two different teams. And if we expect to create experiences within those silos, or a different place to go for hiring a laptop versus, when you need to take compliance training, if we think about employees' experiences, they cross all of those functional areas. So what I would say in terms of where to start is, if you're in human resources or thinking about experience, first of all, you just have to ask who owns it today. And very few organizations can answer that in any consistent way. And it's a bit of a question that doesn't have an answer, because everyone should own experience, but in order to make progress on it, you need a designated owner. So we do want everyone to have some sense of, I want to create an experience, but the first step is towards saying, this steering committee, this team, this leader, let's start with someone who owns it. Then, as that capability occurs, we should go beyond that. And we should say, how does that individual partner with the person asking these questions in IT, in finance, in sales, in marketing? How do we think about all of the places that employees need to come together and deliver a consistent experience? And the thing that's happened in organizations since COVID is the adoption of digital workplace technology, that I could say Microsoft had no idea this was coming, but I've heard this joke that COVID is the best change management that Microsoft has fast. And it's the truth. But now we have this, essentially this parentless child of digital workplace floating around organizations, because sometimes IT owns it, sometimes HR owns it, sometimes it's a separate organization. At the end of the day, it impacts all of those teams. It's the productivity and the collaboration and the communication platform for all of the work that we do. So it doesn't sit neatly inside of one department. And so in the end state, what I really do think will happen is we'll have an enterprise experience COE that will then partner with all of the departments around their experience. But if you are an HR professional listening to this right now, you do not have to get there to make progress. So please don't let that hold you up. Start in your teams, start with what you can impact, but build relationships with folks outside of HR when they ask the right questions, because eventually you'll want to get there.
Yeah, I love it and I celebrate it, and I have that same hope. And when I talk about perpetual work design, that's what I'm talking about. I also have seen, and I'd be interested if you have seen it as well, in response to COVID, there are these tiger teams, there are crisis management teams, and correct me if I'm wrong, they're effectively doing this work that you're talking about. They're looking at the experiences of employees, they're asking questions, they're resourcing, they're designing different experiences to establish well-being and productivity and all those things. So do you believe that the experience management, enterprise COE, can be a derivative of that? Can that be a leverage point towards that end?
Well, I don't know necessarily about the enterprise COE, but what my biggest hope is for COVID is that we don't lose the lessons and the progress that we've learned. So HR has traditionally been the most siloed department in an organization, and we have effectively become more agile in 3 months. We have made this incredible progress that no one would have believed possible. I mean, what you just spoke to and those capabilities, teams stood them up in a weekend. In a weekend. And if you would have asked an HR leader at, a global organization if that was possible in the past, they would have bet you $1 million it wasn't possible. And we proved it wrong. And so what we have to do here is take advantage of the agility that we've learned, take advantage of the ability to stop doing things that aren't adding value, and to say, what does the future of work or the now of work look like? And how do we move into that space and recognize that some of the things that we used to build whole teams around and spend weeks on may not exist anymore, like a job description. Not everyone on your team might have a set of job responsibilities. We might have agile teams. We might have folks who move beyond and across different things based on the changing needs of the workforce. And so I don't know that COVID will result in an enterprise COE, but I do around experience, but I do hope that COVID strengthens the muscle, or that we continue to strengthen the muscle that COVID has forced us to realize we have, around being flexible, around being agile, and around being able to meet our workforce's needs really quickly and in a positive way.
Yeah, no, I love it, and I share that hope. If I might ask, if we step back real quick, because employee experience is a esoteric notion to many. You mentioned digital workplace, digital transformation. There's all these terms floating out there, and how do they either stick together, or are they synonyms? Are they redundant? Do they conflict? So my pointed question to you is, what is employee experience or employee experience management to you and Leapgen? And is that where I would ideally start the conversation? I would appreciate that you meet your clients where they are and to an extent adopt the language that they use. I'm just really curious, is how do you define it? How do you talk to it?
Yeah, and I think that's a really important question because I do feel like a lot of organizations get stuck in the Jacob Morgan definition of experience, physical, cultural, and technology. And
Hmm.
I don't discredit that. I agree that that exists, but I think that we live in a world where digital is really the blend of those things. So me is the blend of human and technology. And when we help organizations design experience, we really focus on that digital experience. And that's because the human experience should be a part of it. Things like your physical, but frankly, we tend to work with medium to large enterprise businesses because if you can throw people at the problem yet, if you're small enough that you can continue to have someone manage it, they can manage it in a mask, they can manage it through an Excel spreadsheet, great. That's something. But when we work with organizations, it's really around when they've gotten too big to continue to do it that way. And they want to continue to create a great relationship, a great employment contract with individuals in an organization. But when you're looking at doing that with 50,000 people or 70,000 people or 350,000 people, the only way to do it is in a sustainable and scalable way. And the only way to do that is to think digital. To me,
Yeah.
I define that experience. Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Keep going.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, so again, experience really could be everyone's responsibility. But when we create teams that own it, what we talk about is how do you deliver capabilities? So I'm not
Hmm.
designing the capability itself. I'm not saying, oh, we should do continuous improvement, or I'm sorry, continuous performance management rather than one time a year. But it's more about when you're ready to bring those capabilities to the workforce, when you want them to interact, when you want them to learn something, when you want them to do something, how do we make sure that delivery is consistent and complete, that they always have all of the right information, they always have the support needed in case they have questions, that they always then have the transaction, and make that seamless and simple so that the policy people and the strategy people upstream in talent acquisition or in benefits, they can design the best capabilities. I'm just here to make sure that by the time it gets to the employee, that it's frictionless, it's complete, that they have everything they need, and that they can not worry about where to go to take advantage of what we've invested in as a capability.
Yeah, no, again, I enjoy what you're saying. I think it's appropriate, and I also have seen organizations talk about this for now a number of years and get stuck, and they get lost in the complexity of the problem. And so I have a couple of questions I'd like to pose. There are CHROs who've changed their title to VP or Chief Employee Experience Officer or something similar, to have that be where to guide the thinking of their direct reports and the organization in mass at large. What's the word I'm looking for? At large. Um, my related question is, you having been in the space for a while now, why do organizations get stuck? And what can you do? What can they do? What do you advocate to get, unstuck? What is there anything that pops to mind given that? I imagine there's a few things.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's ironic, and I'm not saying this just because I'm talking to you, but I think it really does come down to data and technology. I think that's where people get really stuck. I think that HR historically has bought systems thinking that systems will solve problems, and they haven't been
Mhm.
willing to do the hard work to design the process for their people in a way that ties to their business outcome. So Jason, our CEO, always talks about shiny object syndrome. That folks go out and they see this incredible demo and they're like, oh my gosh, that's going to change everything about the organization. And they buy it and then they turn it on and they're like, that doesn't look anything like what I saw in that demo, because they didn't take the time to think through, how should this add value? What is the intended business outcome? And I think the digital component of it is so critical for experience, but we're looking at it without doing the hard work around how do we create an infrastructure? How do we actually change the way that we work to deliver this to the workforce? And so when we work with organizations, we start with just that analysis of where are your gaps? Where are things falling down? And how do we create that strong foundation so that we have the data that we need to be able to drive those grievances, to be able to capture insights about our organization. What skills do we need? Where do we have gaps in our workforce? How do we develop for the future? And so to me, I think it's that we haven't built those muscles around people, around thinking through our data, and we rely too heavily on the technology to do that for us.
Yeah, no, and we, correct me if I'm wrong, rely too heavily on the vendors themselves, and we as organizational leaders need to be more assertive and craft the solutions that we want, and you're a partner in helping craft those solutions and implementing them. Is that a fair summary too?
Yeah, the terms I like to use, I think systems integrators implement. Your SI implements for you. They configure the technology, but you have to ask yourself,
Mhm,
what deployment activities do I need to be doing as well? So, it's as
mhm.
simple as, do I go upstream? Should our organizational hierarchy look like? How do we make sure that finance and HR are on the same page? Should my contractors be in this system with my employees? Do I want that picture into the whole of the workforce, or am I okay that it's separated? What talent do I
Yeah.
need? Okay, how do I get processes to collect that? Your systems integrators don't ask those questions. They ask you for the answers to those questions. And so you have to do the hard work of looking in the mirror well beyond beginning your implementation, answering those questions, figuring out what you really want as a unique organization, and then partner with a systems integrator. Literally is just there to design the system and integrate it with your other solutions. You have to figure out how to do the deployment. And that is where organizations is figuring out, what are all of those things that need to be done? How do we answer those questions? How do we design the change management? How do we do the people and process side of it so that it's not just the technology system?
Well, as a former system integrator with Ernst& and Young, implementer of SAP, I cannot celebrate what you're saying more. I mean, it's truly necessary, and it takes a level of courage, clarity, creativity, and to your point, work that organizations either had a blind spot around or were unwilling to allocate the time and effort to make happen, and you come in and facilitate that. Is that right as well?
It is, but I should mention something that's really different about us. And if you caught the commercial prior to this, you didn't say Leap Gen, it said Leap Now. The reason for that
Mhm.
is because we try not to do traditional consulting work. We try not to come in and do for organizations. We try and come in and do with organizations and teach. If I build you a 2-year roadmap and you execute it, that's really great for 2 years. But what do you do on year 3? And so we try and help
Yeah.
our clients build these capabilities, do the work with us, design operating models so that they can continuously create a roadmap, continuously do this work in the future, and can execute on it. We're happy to help while you need it, but you have to teach and do along with us. We try not to do for you. And so that's our Leap Now model. That's our coaching and advisory model that we build into all of the work that we do, because we don't want, frankly, there's enough work out there for us. We don't need to do it for you and come back and do it for you again in 2 to 3 years. We'd rather teach you how to do it and then move on to the next organization and help them do the same great things.
Well, love it. Well, Alex, thank you for sharing. Certainly, a confidence-inspiring story, and I love what you're doing personally, and there at LeapGen. How can our listeners and viewers learn more about you and what you all are doing?
Yeah, well, if you caught Steven's last statement, he made a statement that I really want to make. Our Instagram is fire. Steven used those words and I love it. Please check out our Instagram. It's great. We have a little team that manages it. But honestly, reach out on LinkedIn. Check out our website. We have a community similar to the People Analytics Future of Work community around the Now of Work. Happy to always share and connect on a one-on-one basis if anyone's interested in talking about this more.
All right, Alex, again, thank you for sharing. All the best to you. And yeah, I hope we will be together at an event before too long. Probably won't be till next year, but I'll be following you. And yeah, keep up the great work. You
Could
be
be
well.
forever. All
Yeah,
right.
might be.
Thanks.